The ultimate intention of all metaphysics is to rise from the cognition of the sensual to that of the supersensual. The critique of pure reason proves that this can never be achieved in theoretical, but very much so in moral practical regard, through the transcendental concept of freedom, which, with regards to the theoretical faculty of cognition, is transcendent and absolutely inexplainable and unprovable. But in regards to the pure practical faculty, which can only be determined through pure reason, has undoubtable reality through the categorical imperative. The reality of the concept of freedom, however, unavoidably leads to the doctrine of the ideality of the things as objects of viewing in space and time. For if these viewings weren't only subjective forms of sensuality, but of the things in themselves, their practical use, that is, the actions, would depend entirely on the mechanism of nature, and freedom, together with its consequence, morality, would be destroyed. Immanuel Kant. In the previous lecture I gave, which I advise you to check out first, I discussed what freedom is to Kant. I explained there that to him, actual freedom is more or less synonymous with rationality and with morality, because actual freedom is not the ability to follow your desires. Any animal has that ability. You are not being free when you do whatever you happen to want without questioning where that want comes from, why you want it, if you really want to want it, if it is really good. Freedom is not the ability to act on whims, to do something stupid or to do something evil, which you understand at the same time to be stupid or evil. That would not be freedom. Rather, freedom in a negative sense means that we are independent of sensual driving springs. Independent not in the sense that we don't have them, but in the sense that we don't have to follow them. So I can feel hunger, sure, and I can let that hunger drive me, but I can also decide that I don't want to follow that hunger for whatever reason, including for moral reasons. I can, if I'm being shipwrecked and now I'm on a small boat with one other survivor, to make it even more clear morally, let's say that other survivor is a child and there's just a limited amount of food. Of course I can eat all the food. Of course I can kick the other survivor off the boat, or kill him and actually eat him too, becoming a cannibal to survive longer. Of course I can do that. And the thing is that an animal might actually do that, right? So animals under usual circumstances might care for their young, but if they were left on such a boat and they would run out of food, there would maybe come a moment where the instinct, where the hunger just takes over, and they eat the other animal, they eat the young. As a human, I can do that too, but I don't have to. I have the ability, this negative freedom of saying, no, I don't want to follow these drives. And this negative freedom I can only have because I have positive freedom. Because I have to follow something. Some law has to determine me. Freedom is not lawlessness. Freedom is not that our decisions are determined by some coin toss. Rather, freedom means not being heteronomous, but autonomous. So we don't have to follow a law that is given to us by nature. We don't have to follow our drives. That, again, is the negative freedom. But rather, that is the positive freedom. We can set ourselves our own law with our reason. So that means we can follow our own insight. we can act according not to our drives, but according to our concepts of good and evil. If I understand something to be evil, I can refrain from doing it simply because I have understood it to be evil. And if I understand something to be good, I can do it simply because I understood it to be good. And that is freedom. So freedom, rationality, morality, they are basically one and the same. Now, again, I explained all of that in more detail in the previous lecture. The thing is, someone could problematically agree with everything said in that lecture and still deny that human beings have free will. Because what I gave here is just sort of the definition or the description of what freedom is. And someone could say, yes, okay, that is right. If we had freedom, it would be this. It would be the ability to act according to what we, through our own reason, understand to be good. But we don't have that ability. Maybe we can think about what would be good or not, but the mere thought cannot motivate us to actually act according to it. In the end of the day, we will still act according to our drives. Somebody could claim that. What was said about freedom so far was really analytical. So remember, I gave my own lecture about it, about how synthetic judgments a priori are possible. That to Kant, all our judgments are either analytic or they are synthetic judgments. The analytic judgments are explaining judgments. They don't really teach us something new. They don't give us new cognition. Rather, they examine, they analyze a concept and bring more clarity into that which, at least unconsciously, we already know. So here, the concept of freedom, the idea of what freedom is, was just analyzed. To Kant, I talked about this in the lecture on what is metaphysics. Metaphysics mainly has to deal with the three supersensual ideas of God, immortality of the soul, and freedom. And he does believe that a large part of the job of metaphysics is to just analyze them, to just bring us more clarity about what we are thinking when we are thinking these ideas. But it is very important to him that through merely analyzing them, we can neither prove nor disprove them. I can analyze the idea of God. I can say, okay, thinking of God involves thinking of a holy being. It involves thinking of an eternal being. It involves thinking of an almighty being. It involves thinking of an all-knowing being. And if you are not thinking these things, you're not really thinking God. Like if you're thinking of something that is limited, that is not almighty or not all-knowing, then that is not God. And that is all fine and good. And even the atheist has to agree with that. I mean, even the atheist, when he denies God, has to know what he is denying. If he doesn't know what God is even supposed to mean, then he cannot decide whether it's real or not. So likewise, you can analyze the concept of freedom and you can say freedom has to be about rationality, about morality. And if you don't understand it, you simply aren't talking about actual freedom. You simply don't understand what freedom is. You are maybe talking about this superficial liberal concept of freedom, about having the freedom of a turnspit. If you just want to follow your drives, you are no more free than the drug addict who gets the drugs that he actually wants. If you understand what actual freedom would imply, you understand that it implies rationality, that it implies morality. But the question remains, is there such a thing as this freedom? And that, as with the other two supersensual ideas, God and immortality of the soul, cannot be proven by a merely analytic judgment. To really learn something new, to really have a new cognition, to really expand your knowledge, you need synthetic judgments, which Kant actually also does call expanding judgments. Now, the thing is that there are synthetic judgments a posteriori, so synthetic judgments from experience. But clearly, they don't teach us anything about the supersensual ideas, because we can't have experience of God or of the immortality of the soul, or of freedom for that matter. We don't experience it. We can think it, but we cannot experience it. So if we can know anything here at all, it would have to be through synthetic judgments a priori. That is, synthetic, expanding judgments that are done prior to experience, so to say. So without any empirical data. And that is, again, I explained that in more detail in an earlier lecture. That is why the whole project of Kant, the project of his main works, of his critiques, deals with the question, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible? And this general question, I already mentioned in an earlier lecture, can be divided into three more specific questions, because to Kant, the human mind or the human psyche has these three parts: the faculty of cognition, the feeling of pleasure and displeasure, and the desiring faculty. And therefore, we also have three kinds of judgments. We have logical judgments that deal with truth, aesthetical judgments that deal with pleasure, and practical judgments that deal with action, how we should act. And so in the critique of pure reason, Kant asks, how are synthetic logical judgments a priori possible? That is precisely, how can we do theoretical metaphysics? How can we, or can we know anything about God, freedom, immortality of the soul? Can we know anything about nature a priori, before experience, before experiments? In the critique of the power of judgment, he asks, how are aesthetical synthetic judgments a priori possible? That is, how can we judge about pleasure and displeasure prior to experience, which is what happens when it comes to the beautiful and the sublime. To Kant, taste, and that too I discussed in its own lecture, taste means the ability to find that which is liked by everyone. So when I say this thing is beautiful, I'm not just saying it's pleasant to me as an individual with my particularity, then I would just say it's pleasant. But rather, when I say it's beautiful, I say this would be liked by everyone, and if someone doesn't like it, he has no taste. And this is a judgment a priori. I'm not first asking people, I'm not first conducting a poll, but rather before experiencing what they are gonna say about this thing, I a priori judge that they must like it. But now, when it comes to the desiring faculty and practical judgments, in the critique of practical reason, Kant asks, how are practical synthetic judgments a priori possible? And this question could also be framed as, how are categorical imperatives possible? I discussed those two in an earlier lecture, a lecture on the imperatives, on skill, prudence, and wisdom. And I explained there that our reason gives us certain, let's say, directives for how we should act, what would be rational actions. And there are these hypothetical imperatives that say, if you have this or that goal, the best course of action for reaching that goal would be this. But only if you have that goal. If you don't have that goal, you also don't have to take that action. You don't need the means if you don't want to reach this end. But there are also categorical imperatives where reason just tells us act in this manner. Not to reach a certain goal, not if you want something, but rather you ought to do this. This is your duty. And these categorical imperatives, or the categorical imperative, as there's really just the one, that is the moral law. And that is precisely synthetic practical judgment a priori. So the question, how are those judgments possible, and how is a categorical imperative possible? So how is it possible for our reason, our practical reason, our will, to not just be empirical reason, so to not just serve as an instrument, as it does in the hypothetical imperatives, to not just serve as an instrument for us reaching our non-rational, our animal-like goals, but rather how is it possible for reason itself to set a goal, to tell us what to do? How is autonomy of reason, so reason giving itself its own law, how is that possible? That's basically the question that Kant asks in the Critique of Practical Reason. And therefore this critique is sort of parallel to the critique of pure reason, but in a way things are turned upside down here, because in the critique of pure reason the result that Kant reaches is to say that we can use empirical reason. So we can, when it comes to cognition, to finding the truth, we can use reason and apply it to our experience, as we do in natural science. And it can help us understand nature, understand the world of our experience better. This is an immanent use of reason. So reason being immanent, staying inside the borders, the limits within which it should stay. But if we try with speculative reason to go beyond the limits of experience, to, so to say, fly into the ether, outside of the realm of nature, outside of that which we sensually can experience, as we do in metaphysics, as we do when we speculate about those three ideas of God, freedom, immortality of the soul, our thinking becomes empty. We can make up all sort of things, and we cannot disprove them. If these thoughts don't contradict themselves, then they are logically possible, so we don't see why they couldn't be true, but we also don't see why they could be true. We cannot say anything about them, and therefore theoretical reason, when it goes beyond the limits of experience, stops being immanent. It becomes transcendent, transcending the borders which should limit it. Now, when it comes to practical reason and the critique of practical reason, the result is kind of just the opposite. Here, Kant shows that practical reason needs to be pure practical reason. So it needs to stay, so to say, clean of anything empirical, of anything sensual. We need to ask reason alone, what do we ought to do? And that is, in the practical sense, the immanent use of reason. That is reason staying within its borders. Here in the practical, reason becomes transcendent when it goes outside, so to say, of the supersensual realm, outside of the realm of freedom and morality, when it becomes empirical, practical reason, and mixes the question, what do I ought to do, with the question, what do I want to do, or what would make me happy, what would bring me pleasure. And here this is reason being transcendent. Here this is reason, practical reason now, overstepping its line. And to just be clear, the question to Kant is, how are such synthetic practical judgments a priori? How are categorical imperatives possible? The question is not, are they possible? This is certain. To Kant, denying it would mean denying your own humanity, because this is the only thing that lifts us out of nature, that lets us rise above the animals, and that makes us human. This ability to decide what is good, what is evil, to distinguish between good and evil. You can go back to the Bible, right? This is when we sort of step out of the paradise, animal-like, unthinking, innocent state, when we eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And this ability, this freedom, this ability to not just, follow our drives, but rather drive ourselves, so to say. This is what makes us human. It is not about instrumental reason. It is not about how smart we are. Here we might be superior to the animals, sure, but that is just a difference of degree. I mean, between some ape or some crow using a stick to reach food inside somewhere where they couldn't otherwise reach, and us sending a rocket to the moon, there might be a big gap, but still it is just a gap of degree, right? As nowadays many biologists would also actually say, right? We may be smarter, so to say, we may be more clever than the animals, but that doesn't mean that we are of an entirely different quality. It is not this instrumental reason which sets us apart. What sets us apart is our freedom. What sets us apart is our morality, Kant says. So to deny it would mean denying your humanity and becoming an animal, becoming a monster. Especially since we can think about good and evil. No one can deny that. I mean, even if they deny free will, even if they say that, all this moral talk is just an illusion, at the end of the day, we act on our instincts. We act out of self-interest. Even seemingly moral actions are done out of self-interest. Even when you say that, you cannot deny that people can think about what would be moral. So if you're saying this thinking is worthless, this thinking is just an illusion, that would be a sort of self-deny. That would be denying the most noble thing we have, Kant says. And to him, there cannot be any statement in any science that is more clear, more certain then is our moral duty. No other statement in any science, not even from mathematics, not even that 1 + 1 is 2, that is less certain, even though it is, of course, very, very much certain, that is less certain than our moral duty. And to be clear, by certain, Kant doesn't necessarily mean self-evident. I mean, surely I would meet more people if I asked on the street who would agree with me that 1 + 1 is 2 than people who would agree with me on all moral matters. That is sure. But just because this might be more complicated, just because this might be less self-evident to some people, doesn't mean that it is uncertain. To Kant, it is the most certain thing there is, that we have a moral duty. The question is how? How is this possible? And before I get to how are categorical imperatives possible, let's first take a look at the hypothetical imperatives. Here, the answer, how are they possible? How can reason be instrumental? How can reason tell us what to do to reach a certain goal we already have? Is quite simple, because Kant says these are really not synthetic, these are analytic judgments. They are analytic judgments because I want to reach some goal, X, and reason tells me to use the means for that goal, Y. So reason just says, if you want X, you ought to do Y. That is an analytic statement. There's sometimes some confusion about this. Not everyone who reads Kant gets this right away. So let me clear up that, of course, us having that goal, that is synthetic. Like, let's go with an example I used in previous lectures already. Let's say I want to put a picture on my wall, and therefore reason tells me I have to drive a nail into the wall, and that I have to do with a hammer. The fact that I want to put a picture on the wall at all, knowing that is of course not analytic. I cannot just analyze my will, and in the mere concept of a will there is not contained wanting to put a picture on the wall. No, I only know that through a synthetic judgment. I know that this is a synthetic judgment a posteriori. I know that this would bring me pleasure, seeing that picture on the wall. But that is not a practical judgment. Saying it would bring me pleasure is an aesthetical judgment. Also, to know that in order to put the picture on the wall, I need a nail in the wall. And in order to have the nail in the wall, I need to use a hammer. That too is, of course, a synthetic judgment. I cannot merely analyze the concept of a picture on the wall. To know this, I need experience. So it is a synthetic judgment a posteriori. But it is again not a practical judgment. It is a logical judgment. So this is just about knowing the world, knowing the laws of nature, so to say, and knowing therefore that a hammer can drive a nail into the wall. I mean, just having this general knowledge is not practical. It doesn't tell me that I should do this, because I should only do it if I want to have a nail in the wall. If I don't want to have a nail in the wall, then I should not use a hammer. It is just the knowledge of how nature works, the knowledge that a hammer can drive a nail into the wall. So there are synthetic judgments involved. Me wanting the picture on the wall, me knowing that you can put up a picture with a nail that you drive in with a hammer. But now the actual practical instruction, the hypothetical imperative, more precisely a problematic hypothetical imperative, an advice of skill that tells me use a hammer to drive a nail into the wall, that is analytic. Because if I already know I want to have a nail in the wall, and if I already know I can drive a nail into the wall with a hammer, then when I ask myself the question, okay, what should I do now? The answer is just analytical. The answer is, well, in order to reach that goal, you know which goal you have. You know you want a nail in the wall. You need to use the means that lets you reach that goal. And you know which means you need to use for this goal. You know you need a hammer. Kant says the hypothetical judgments are analytic in general because they all say if you want to reach the goal X, whatever X may be, you need to use the means that lead to that goal. You need to do Y, whatever, once again, Y may be. Finding out what X and what Y are, that is synthetic, but that is not practical as such. The only practical instruction is if you know what your goal is, and if you know what means lead you to that goal, you need to apply those very means. And if we ask how is such a hypothetical imperative possible, well, I already discussed in the lecture on how are synthetic judgments a priori possible, that all analytical judgments, according to Kant, are based on the logical principle of contradiction, which tells us something cannot be A and non-A. Something cannot contradict itself. And Kant says it would be a contradiction to say I have a certain goal, but I don't want to use the means for that goal. Kant says all hypothetical imperatives are basically based on the insight whoever has a certain end, a certain purpose that he wants to reach, also by necessity wants the means that lead to that end. It makes no sense. It would go against the principle of contradiction. It would be a self-contradiction to say, I want X, but I don't want Y, even though Y is the means that lets me realize X. That makes no sense. If I want X, then I have to want Y. Otherwise, I don't really want X. Otherwise, it may be some sort of empty wish, some thinking, oh, that might be nice. But if I really want something, then I want what leads to it. I want what is necessary for it. In German, we have a saying, a proverb that says, wash my pelt, but don't make me wet. Sort of has the same meaning as someone wanting to have to have his cake and eat it too. So the point is that this makes no sense, right? You cannot say, wash me, I want to get washed, I want to get clean, but I don't want to get wet. If you want to get washed, you by necessity want to get wet. There is no synthesis here. You don't need to synthesize the wanting to be washed with wanting to be wet, but rather wanting to be washed, if you analyze what that means, if you know what washing entails, then you know wanting to be washed already includes the will to get wet. So that is the hypothetical imperatives. And I just want to stress that when this is discussed in the abstract, as Kant does, it seems to be rather uncontroversial, right? He just says, okay, whoever has a certain purpose has to want the means that lead to that purpose. Otherwise, he would contradict himself. This should be self-evident. This should be something that everyone can agree with. And usually, if you talk about this in the abstract way, people can agree with this. Yet, in many cases, if you, actually apply this principle, so if you imply, if you insinuate that someone having a certain goal, which he clearly states, must also want whatever is needed to realize that goal, people will get very, very mad at you. This can be observed very much in political and social matters. Often there is no better way, no surer way to get cancelled, to become a pariah, than to just point out what people necessarily want by their self-confessed goals, because it is the necessary means to that goal. So, for example, here in Germany, for years and years now, and especially in about the last year, there's been a lot of discussion about refugees, and many people saying they don't want Germany to take in any more refugees. Well, those people want to murder refugees. They want to kill thousands of people. And the thing is that the first statement, I think Germany should be closed off to refugees, is a perfectly acceptable statement in political discourse here. It's something many people say, many politicians say, something that is discussed on talk shows, in newspaper articles, whatever. But if you tell someone, okay, so you want to murder thousands of people, that person will usually, if he's not an outright Nazi, will not say, yeah, I want to murder thousands of people, but rather that person will get angry with you. That person will say, oh, how dare you, how can you suggest that I would want to kill thousands of people? Well, because you just said so. How else would you keep the refugees out? Murdering them is really the only way to keep them out. I mean, I'm reminded of some refugee I talked to when I gave German classes to refugees. He told me he had come through Turkey to Greece, and then from Greece he had gone to Bulgaria, and there the authorities had corked him and sent him back to Greece. What did he do? He went to Bulgaria again. He was sent back again. This happened for 8 times. After the 8th time, he managed to somehow pass through Bulgaria and go on his way till he reached Germany. Now I ask you, this guy, do you honestly think if he had been sent back to Greece a 9th time, he would have been like, okay, I guess this is it. I'm not gonna try anymore? No, of course not. He would have tried a 10th time and an 11th time. I also remember watching some report on refugees that tried to get from France to the United Kingdom, trying to go through the tunnel that runs under the channel. And it is fenced off, the area, by a several meters high fence. And they interviewed some refugee who had tried to climb it and had actually fallen down, broken both of his arms. But in the interview, he was already saying, as soon as my arms are better again, I will try again. Even so, there was, of course, the chance that he would fall down again and maybe this time break his neck. And don't get me started even on all the thousands, the tens of thousands of refugees that year after year set out on boats trying to cross the Mediterranean, knowing full well that maybe the children they have with them, that they may drown. So my point is, these people have such a level of desperation and determination, they are not stopping. They are not just turning back if you tell them, no, sorry, you're not allowed here. So if you don't want them, there's really only one possibility. All of Europe has to be one big bastion, surrounded by fences, by walls, by barbed wires, and there have to be people guarding the borders, shooting anyone. If you don't shoot these refugees, they will keep trying. So don't tell me you don't want refugees and then be offended if I say the quiet part out loud. You want to murder these people. Simple as that. I mean, they already are being murdered in the Mediterranean or in African countries like Tunisia or Libya that the European Union is paying to, well, we don't really know to what, right? We don't really want to know, at least. We just tell them, take our money and keep them away from us. And of course, they are sent to prison camps with terrible conditions. They are driven back into the desert, but we don't look too closely what's happening there. Or likewise, when people say they are against slavery, let's say, they are against exploitation, they are against child labor. In the case of most people, my answer is no, you are not. Stop lying. If you are for this sort of economy we have, this capitalistic, growth-orientated consumer society, and if you partake in that, if you like buying new fashion every season, if you like regularly buying the newest iPhone, then of course you support slavery. Of course you support child labor. This cannot be done in any other way. There is simply no possibility to have this level of consumption, to have this level of economic growth, to have so many goods that are not really necessary for living. I'm not talking about having food or whatever, but rather superfluous stuff that you don't truly need, luxury goods, to such cheap prices. That's not possible without exploitation. That's not possible without modern day slavery. That's not possible without child labor. So if you go and consume, if you go and buy useless stuff made in China that you don't really need from Amazon, then you have a purpose and you clearly want the means that lead to that purpose. And there is only one means by which that purpose can be achieved. And that one means does not involve human rights. That's simply a fact. Or last example, which is especially controversial to say here where I live in Germany, but of course also in other places in the West still. If you say that Israel is an apartheid state, or if you say that Israel is committing genocide, you get accused of being an anti-Semite. But here's the thing. Israel has made it very clear that it doesn't want a Palestinian state. There has been a vote about this in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament. And none of the Zionist parties, I'm not just talking about the ruling parties, I'm not just talking about the right-wingers. No, including the left-wing Zionists, including the Social Democrats, none of them voted against this. Against this motion saying we are against the Palestinian state. So this is not some conspiracy theory, right? This is not some mad accusation. This is their official policy. They don't want a Palestinian state. And of course, they also don't want to integrate the Palestinians into their state with full equal rights, because there are about as many Palestinians as there are Jews living in that land. So that would mean the end of Israel as a Jewish state, if there was no Jewish majority anymore. Well, but the Palestinians exist and they live there, right? So by applying simple logic, if there is this people and we don't want them to have their own state or to be equal citizens of our state, well, what is the means to achieve that goal, to prevent Palestinians having their own state or being part of our state? I only see three possible means. Anyone who finds that anti-Semitic is welcome in the comments to point out a fourth mean. But all I see is either the Palestinians stay, but without citizenship, either in Israel or in a state of their own, without equal rights, therefore, that would be called apartheid. I'm sorry, that's just the definition of what apartheid is. Or the Palestinians are driven away into Egypt or somewhere. That's ethnic cleansing. Or the Palestinian people as such is eradicated. That would be genocide. There simply is no fourth possibility here. If you don't want them to have a state, whether a state of their own or a state shared with the Jews, then you are for apartheid or genocide. Maybe you don't like saying so openly. Maybe if someone else says it, it hurts your feelings. But that is the fact. That is what reason says. If you have a purpose, you necessarily want the means that lead to that purpose. If you were not okay with the means, you would let go of the purpose. Otherwise, you would be contradicting yourself. You would go against the principle of contradiction. So you will have to live with someone calling you evil unless you would prefer being called an utter idiot. Because there's really no third possibility here. Either you want the means that lead to your purpose, or you are too stupid to understand that you can't have the purpose without your means. And I hope that these examples show that what should be a very obvious, a very self-evident thing, once again, whoever has a purpose wants the means that lead to that purpose, is really quite a lot more controversial than it should be. You really will not be liked by many people if you point out what the means are that they necessarily want if their purpose is what they clearly say their purpose is. But with that, let's turn from the hypothetical imperatives to the categorical imperatives, because I mean that is the actual question still, right? How are they possible? It should be clear that such imperatives are indeed synthetic and not just analytic. Any synthetic judgment is a combination, that is a synthesis of two things, right? And when it comes to a synthetic practical judgment, that would be a combination of our will with a certain action, making us want that action. Again, in the hypothetical imperatives, the will does not need to be connected with the action. We just have to analyze the will, because I already want something, right? I already want to put a picture on the wall. So now I just have to analyze what putting a picture on the wall entails. And I will find it entails driving a nail into the wall, which entails using a hammer. So here the action is already included in the will, because I already have a specific will. But when it comes to moral action, that is not the case, right? I don't already want something. If I did, then this would not be about morality. This would again be about self-interest, right? I would already want something, and it would just so happen that I could achieve whatever I want through moral means, right? So I want to go to heaven, let's say, if I have such beliefs, and I believe that I go to heaven by helping other people. Okay, but then indeed this would be a hypothetical imperative. Then I could just analyze my will and say, okay, wanting to go to heaven entails wanting to help other people because that's what will buy me my ticket into heaven. But clearly I'm not a good person in this case. I'm just being selfish, and it just so happens that because of my faith I believe that the best way to be selfish is by helping others. But in actual moral action, I don't want anything. So I have this concept of a will, but the will as such is empty. And now on the other hand, I have certain actions, certain moral actions. How can they be combined? How can reason tell me your will should include these actions, even though for now it doesn't? Well, I already said in the lecture on how are synthetic judgments a priori possible, that in order to combine, to synthesize two things, two concepts, Kant says we always need a third in which they can be synthesized. Now, when it comes to synthetic judgment a posteriori, that third thing is experience, right? The example I used back in that other lecture was judgment ravens are black. How is the concept of raven and the concept of blackness, how are they synthesized? In experience, because I see a black raven. I see a bird which contains both these things, ravenness and blackness. When it comes to synthetic judgments a priori, however, clearly the third thing in which I combine my concepts cannot be experience. Then it would not be a priori. Well, Kant had shown in the Critique of Pure Reason that for theoretical, for logical synthetic judgments a priori, the third thing is time and space as our forms of viewing. We know a priori that we view everything in time and space, that we don't get these from experience, but rather we sort of give them to experience. They are our forms of viewing, and therefore we can combine concepts we have a priori in time and space. Now, this does not work for the practical. This does not work for the categorical imperative. I cannot combine my will with a certain action in time or space. So here I need another third. And that other third, Kant says, is the idea of freedom. If I have the idea of freedom, again, one of the three ideas that metaphysics deals with, alongside God and immortality of the soul, but theoretical metaphysics just results in us understanding that we cannot know, that we cannot have theoretical knowledge about these three ideas, but still we have them as ideas, and just like we cannot prove them, we also cannot disprove them. Here, when it comes to the practical, through the idea of freedom, I can combine my will with a certain action. In the idea of freedom, my will can be contained. I am free, I have free will, I am autonomous. And in the idea of freedom, certain actions, the moral actions, can be contained only by acting morally, only by acting according to a law which could be a universal law for everyone, only by acting according to a law which I gave myself, instead of being heteronomous and following the law of nature, following my own instincts, am I free. At this point, it is important to have understood the critique of pure reason and what Kant said there. In particular, I recommend to you to watch my previous lecture on rational cosmology and the question, is there freedom in this universe? Because in the critique of pure reason, Kant asks, how are synthetic logical judgments a priori possible? How is metaphysics possible? Is it possible to know anything about the reality of freedom, of our immortal soul, of God? And he comes to the conclusion that no, we cannot know anything about the supersensual. That means there is no way to prove that there is free will, but we really cannot know anything about it, meaning there's also no way to prove that there isn't. It remains an open question. Kant says in the Critique of Pure Reason that this world that we find ourselves in, this nature, is just the world as it appears to us. And it appears to us as being determined by a natural law of causality. And we ourselves, as sensual beings with a body, with a psyche, we appear as being part of that nature, and therefore as being part of that natural chain of causality. Meaning, all our actions, all our thoughts appear to be caused by something that came before. Kant already said that. That's also why it's so stupid when people nowadays come along and say, the neuroscientists and their experiments with the human brain have now disproven freedom and what Kant says about freedom. It is true that nowadays we might know even more details about how exactly this chain of causality in nature works, what exactly comes before our thoughts or our actions, but that there is something before it at all, which may cause them. That this world appears as everything being caused by something that came before. That is nothing new. That is what Kant already said. But the point to him is, this is just true for the world of appearance. We don't know anything about the things in themselves, including about us. We don't know what we are as a thing in itself. We don't know what we are independent of the way we appear to ourselves through our outer senses as a body and also through our inner senses as a psyche. So there is no reason why it shouldn't be possible that while as an appearance I am indeed determined by the natural law, at the same time as an intelligible being, I am determined by a completely different, by a supersensual law. There's nothing that could disprove that. There's also nothing, if we just look at speculative reason, just at theoretical philosophy, there's also nothing that does prove it. But now, when it comes to practical reason, we find that, we do have this idea of another, of a supersensual law. That is the moral law. And that can indeed determine us. And so, because maybe this is very abstract, so to make it more clear with an example, when I do a certain action, Let's say I do something evil. Let's say I commit murder. I kill somebody. I can, on the one hand, look at this action as part of nature and of the chain of causality. Meaning, I can explain it as being caused by what came before and therefore as being necessary. I can explain it as me being unfree. So, the person who killed somebody could tell himself and try to rationalize and justify his actions, could tell himself, well, I didn't mean to kill him, but I was drunk. It was not really me who killed him, it was my drunkenness. Or, maybe I was drunk and got into my car and I ran him over, it was an accident. Or maybe this person who killed somebody else could tell himself, well, he provoked me. The things he did, the things he said, he made me mad, and I got so mad that I wasn't thinking straight anymore. I just attacked him. I just started beating him up. I didn't mean to kill him, but it was him who made me so aggressive, and I just happened to bash his head in. I didn't mean to. So someone could try to explain his actions as necessary, as being caused by something else. And he could try to tell that to his own conscience. But if he has a conscience at all, if he's not completely rotten to the core, he will not really be satisfied with that. He will not really be able to completely make his conscience shut up and to completely get rid of his feelings of regret or guilt. He will not be able to help another voice in him saying, okay, yeah, maybe you were drunk, maybe you didn't plan to run that person over, maybe as such your action was not free, was caused by your drunkenness, but then you should not have gotten drunk. That is your fault. That is what makes you guilty. You should not have gotten drunk and gotten into that car while drunk. Or maybe a voice in his head will say, okay, yeah, maybe that other guy provoked you, but you should not have lost your temper like that. You should not have allowed him to provoke you like that. Or maybe the voice will also say, come on, you knew yourself. This is not the first time someone provoked you. You are always overly aggressive. You're always easily provoked. You're always getting into fights. It had to end with somebody getting seriously injured or killed someday. You should have done something about this sooner. You should have maybe went to do some anti-aggression therapy or whatever. So that's Kant's point. We can look at every action that we ourselves or that somebody else committed as if that action was unfree, as if the events in nature had to cause that action. But still, if we have a conscience, if we have any morality at all, we will not accept that. We will always say, no, you or I myself should have acted differently. No matter how many causes there may have been for that action, they are not a justification. They don't take your guilt away. Despite all those causes, you should have acted differently. And that, Kant says, implies freedom. Because a should necessarily implies a could. It makes no sense to tell somebody you should do this or that is your duty, if we believe that he cannot do it. Like, we wouldn't tell somebody it is your moral duty to live forever. You are not allowed to die. this would just not make sense, because we know that this is not in our power. If we tell somebody, including especially ourselves, if we tell somebody, you should do that, or you should have done that, you shouldn't have done this, then whether we want to or not, we are implying that he could have acted in that way. We already believe that he could have acted in that way. If we truly didn't believe that it was possible for him to act in a different manner, then we wouldn't tell him you should have. Like, that's exactly why we don't tell animals that they have done evil, they have acted wrong if they hurt somebody. Like if a shark attacks you and bites your leg, tears your leg off, you don't tell that shark you shouldn't have done that. Rather, you tell yourself, I shouldn't have gotten into the water with the sharks. Because here, we clearly understand that the animal has no freedom, that the animal just follows its drives. If we tell somebody you shouldn't have done that, we already believe that he could have prevented himself from doing it. A shall implies a could, and therefore morality, moral duty, implies freedom. I want to clarify, somebody could think that Kant is applying some sort of circular reasoning here. And Kant himself already noted that somebody could misunderstand him in that way, because it could sound as if Kant was proving freedom through morality, saying, well, we have a moral duty to do something and to don't do something, therefore we must be free, while at the same time proving morality through freedom, saying, well, we have a moral responsibility, we have a duty to do a certain thing and to not do other things because we are free. And this would, of course, be circular, but that is not precisely Kant's point. Here it is important to distinguish between what in philosophy has been in the past called the ratio essendi, so the reason of being, and what has been called the ratio cognoscendi, so the reason of cognition, the reason of knowledge, right? So the reason why something is the case and the reason why you know that it is the case. So let's say I ask you, how do you know that you have eyes? And you tell me, well, I looked into a mirror and I saw that I had eyes. And then I ask you, okay, and how were you able to look into a mirror and to see your own face and to see your own eyes in that mirror? And you would answer me, because I have eyes and through them I can see. This sounds circular, right? But it is in fact not. Because the eyes are the reason of being, of the seeing. Meaning, since you do have eyes, you can see, including seeing yourself in the mirror. You don't necessarily have to ever see your own eyes, right? And therefore, you also don't have to know that you have eyes. Like, if you didn't have eyes, or if they didn't work, if you were blind, you could not see at all, and you could not see your own image in the mirror. But on the other hand, seeing your image in the mirror is the reason of knowing that you have eyes, because you understand that it is only possible through the eyes. So you don't have to know that you have eyes. You don't have to see yourself in the mirror. I mean, imagine you lived in a world without mirrors and without anybody else seeing you and telling you about your eyes. Like you're alone on a lone island and there are no mirrors. And imagine there's also nothing else that can serve as a mirror. Like imagine water was not reflecting your image. In that case, you would not know that you have eyes exactly. I mean, you could maybe feel your face, you could feel that there's something here, but you would, for example, not know what your eye color is, or that there even is such a thing as an iris that has a certain color. Um, so just because you have eyes and you can see through them, it doesn't necessarily mean that you ever realize that you have them and that you see through them. But when you do, on the other hand, see your eyes in the mirror, which is only possible because you have them, then it can make you understand that you have eyes. It can prove to you that you have eyes because you saw them. There's nothing circular about this. One more analogy. Let's say a woman gets pregnant, therefore she misses her period, and her missing her period makes her realize that she's pregnant. Again, this may sound circular. If I ask her, why did you miss your period? She tells me, because I'm pregnant. And if I ask her, how do you know that you are pregnant? She tells me, because I missed my period. It may sound circular, but it is not, because she's not saying that missing her period caused her to be pregnant. She was pregnant anyways. The causation only works in one direction, right? Being pregnant caused her to miss her period. But missing her period caused her the knowledge of being pregnant. It made her realize that she is pregnant because it made her realize, okay, something happened, I missed my period. It must have been caused by something that causes probably me being pregnant. And the same is Kant's argument for freedom. So he's not saying that morality makes us free. No, freedom makes us moral beings that have a moral duty. We could, in theory, live our lives as free beings without ever reflecting on it, without ever realizing that we are free. Maybe also without ever reflecting about morality and realizing our duty. We are free. That is the cause of existence of our moral responsibility. But we would probably never realize that we are free if it wasn't for that exact moral responsibility. Only because of that do we actually start to realize our freedom. Because the moment I realize I have a duty to act in this manner and to not act in this manner, or maybe the moment I realize, oh, I shouldn't have done what I just did. It was wrong. I should have acted in another manner. That is the moment when I realize that I have freedom, because otherwise this should or shouldn't would not make sense. So that is Kant's argument for freedom. The argument is basically that if there is a fact, X, and that fact can only be explained in a certain manner, Y, and this manner, this Y, cannot be proven any other way, but it can also not be proven to be impossible. So it could potentially be real. Then that proves Y, right? If there's X, and X can only be under the condition Y, and there's nothing proving that Y is impossible, then Y is real. That is basically the argument. So Kant is saying that we do have practical freedom. That is a fact. I talked in the previous lecture on what is freedom. I talked about different concepts of freedom, and to Kant, practical freedom basically means that in the course of our lives, we find in ourselves this ability to not be slaves to our drives, to act against our own drives. As I already said, take hunger. You find in yourself the ability to resist your hunger. Even for other than moral reasons, like you're on some diet or you are fasting because of your faith, but also especially for moral reasons. As I said, you're on this boat after shipwreck with somebody else, and you understand that it would be wrong to take all the food for yourself. So despite having hunger, you refrain from eating. That is practical freedom. Practical freedom is a fact. Even those who deny free will, say it's an illusion, cannot deny the fact of it, cannot deny that we find that we can indeed resist some of our drives. Now Kant asks, how is this fact possible? You could frame it in the basic question of transcendental philosophy: what is the condition of the possibility of this? And he says, practical freedom, this fact we know from experience, implies transcendental freedom, implies our ability to start a new chain of causality, to not be part of a chain where, for example, the hunger causes me to eat and I'm not free in this action of eating because it was caused by what came before, but rather to start my own chain where I myself am the first cause, because I give myself, I have autonomy, I give myself the moral law. This transcendental freedom is implied by the practical freedom. And once again, the critique of pure reason had shown that when it comes to speculation, to theoretical considerations, there's no way of proving this transcendental freedom. There's no way of proving that we are not just part of the natural chain of causality but can start our own chain. But there's also no way of disproving it. And so, since we find practical freedom is a fact, since this fact cannot be explained except through the idea of transcendental freedom, and since that idea can not be proven, but also not be proven to be impossible, we now have reason to say that this transcendental freedom is in fact real. So Kant says we can prove the reality of our idea of freedom, but we can only prove it in a practical manner, meaning we can only prove it through morality. If we have a moral duty, we must be free. We do indeed have a moral duty, so we are free, but it means that, on the other hand, if you deny morality, you have no reason at all to believe in freedom. It would be completely irrational, because there would be no good reason for it, to believe in freedom if you deny morality. The critique of pure reason clearly showed that all the supersensual ideas, God, immortality of the soul, and freedom, if they are just considered from the perspective of speculation, of theoretical philosophy, there is not a single thing that speaks for them, that proves them, that even proves their possibility, that even proves that they are likely. Nothing. There's also nothing disproving them, but there's nothing proving them. The only possible proof for freedom cannot come from a theoretical argument, but only from a practical argument, from morality. This is important because it means that all those people who deny morality, those people, I talked about them in the previous lecture on what is freedom, the liberals, to whom freedom just means following their own whims and desires that they never question. And all those people who talk about being pragmatic and realistic, and to whom being rational just means being selfish, following your own goals, your own self-interest, even if it harms others. All those people, they may talk about freedom, but they have no good reason to do so. How do they know that they are free? Just because they are doing what they want? I said in that other lecture, I used an image of Fichte's. I said if you imagine a tree, let's say an apple tree, having consciousness, he would also now feel free if he gets to grow apples. And he would feel unfree if through grafting you forced him to grow some other fruits. But that was not his free decision to grow apples. That's just in his nature. The drug addict is not free if he takes his drugs. It's his addiction driving him to do it. So really, if you reject morality, there is no reason to believe that you are free. That whatever you are doing, because you want to do it, you could also have done something else. No, you now have all the reason to believe that you were forced to do it by your drives, that you couldn't have possibly done something else. You have no reason to believe that you are more than some sort of programmed robot. Just like the robot is not free, you, if you are a biological robot and your programming is in your genes, let's say, you're also not free. Only if you accept morality do you have a reason to believe in freedom. And I want to point out that Kant's argument for freedom, the way he talks about it in a very abstract, scientific, scholarly manner, may make it seem quite convoluted and complicated and like something no normal person, only some philosopher with his head in the clouds could come up with. But in fact, I would posit that this is pretty much how the unscholarly intellect actually thinks and reasons. I had a talk a while ago with a guy who didn't have much previous philosophical knowledge or any higher education at all. It was a man from a working class background who didn't graduate from high school, who didn't go to university, but now had developed an interest in philosophy and had booked some hours, some lessons with me, talked to me. And we were talking about free will, and he could not understand. He had quite a difficulty grasping that this was even a question. It just seemed obvious and self-evident to him that we are free. And I tried to explain to him that there are quite serious arguments against freedom. That if you accept that nature is not just an appearance, but a thing in itself. That is, if you are not a transcendental idealist, as Kant is, but a transcendental realist, as, let's say, Spinoza was, or as the people nowadays are, who say that the neuroscientists who say that there are certain processes in our brain and they can be observed happening already some split seconds before we consciously make a decision or make a choice. Therefore, we are not free. If you accept that nature is a thing in itself, then there is only the natural law, and then we aren't free. And there are quite good arguments from people like Spinoza against freedom. This person had a really hard time understanding that. To him, it just seemed obvious that he is free. At first, he said, well, but I'm sitting now. I could stand up if I wanted. To which I said, no, you just assume that you can stand up. But how would you know? Freedom cannot be proven from experience. It's something completely supersensual. It's not a phenomenon, it's a noumenon. Therefore, if it can be proven at all, it has to happen a priori, not a posteriori. Because right now you're sitting, you're not standing up. So nothing in experience proves that you could stand up if you wanted. Maybe it's just an illusion. And even if you do indeed now stand up, again, this would only prove that you stood up. It doesn't prove that you had the choice to also keep sitting. Maybe you had to stand up in that exact second and you had no choice but to stand up. Maybe you just think that you could have kept sitting on your chair, but you actually couldn't. Experience can only tell us that we did A. Experience can never tell us that we could also have done B instead. I mean, we would have to, I don't know, take a time machine and go back in time and then do the opposite. Keep sitting the moment when we actually stood up last time to prove it from experience. That's not possible. So after that, and this is my point where I want to get at, after that, the guy said, okay, but since I was a young man, I like going to the sauna, and then I would obviously be naked there, and there would be other naked people, including naked women, and I would maybe see a naked girl that I liked, that I found hot, and would get excited. And now I could jump on her, I could harass her, I could rape her, but I've never done that because it would be wrong. So I'm free. I'm not a slave to my drives. I can understand that following them in this instance would be wrong. And this is precisely Kant's argument, right? He is saying, I have a certain drive from my nature. I understand that following it would be wrong, that I should not do that I have a moral obligation not to do it. And indeed, I am able to act not on my drive, but on the mere thought of that obligation. The thought instead of the drive can motivate me, can determine the choice I make. Therefore, I am free. That is Kant's argument, coming from someone who, again, had no higher education or previous knowledge of Kant or of philosophy. Likewise, to go with one other example, to stay with the general topic of rape, in the last year, there has been this very big case in France, right? Going through all the media of Gisèle Pellicot, who for many, many years, it turned out, had again and again been drugged by her husband. And then he found random men on the internet that he invited over, and that he let rape his wife while she was passed out. And when that was found out, the then ex-husband and 50 other men got accused and got convicted for raping Gisèle Pellicot. And in some article on that court case, I read that the ex-husband had explained in court that he himself, as a child, I think when he was like 9, or if I remember right, he himself as a child had been abused and raped. And he said that had traumatized him, that had messed up his sexuality, that had given him all sorts of perversions, and that was the reason why he had done this to his wife, why he had drugged her and raped her and found other strange men online to rape her in that drugged state. And I mean, to be sure, maybe he just made that up in the hopes that this story would lead to a milder verdict, to him being punished less harshly. I can, of course, not judge that, but I don't have to. I'm not a judge presiding over that case. For our purposes, it doesn't really matter if he lied or if this is the truth. We can just treat it as a fictional case. We can just assume that it is the truth. It could be the truth, certainly. Maybe he was raped as a child. Maybe that did very much mess him up and lead to him having these perverse fantasies and so on. And if that is the case, then that's a terrible thing, of course. That should not have happened. He should not have been raped as a child, of course. Whoever did that should not have done that. That was a terrible crime. But I think, or I hope you can all agree, every normal person would still say that doesn't excuse what you have done to your wife and potentially to others, potentially also to your daughter and so on. There was more to that case, but even just to your wife, that doesn't excuse it. Whatever may have happened to you was indeed terrible and inexcusable, but still what you did is also inexcusable, and what happened to you does not excuse or justify it. It does not take away from your guilt. And this is again exactly what Kant is saying. He's saying when we do something, so in this case, when this husband raped his wife, we can always look at nature, look at experience, look at the world that appears to us, and find something earlier that may have caused this action, that can serve as an explanation for that action. So yeah, we can say, okay, he raped his wife because he himself was raped as a child. That makes sense. And it indeed does make sense on some level, sure. But no matter how much sense it makes, no matter how terrible the things that might have been done to him, at the same time, we cannot help but saying, and still you should not have done that. However strong the causes that may have caused your actions, you should have resisted them. Like we would say, okay, maybe what happened to you as a child traumatized you, maybe it gave you perversions, perverse drives, fantasies of raping women. If you could not deal with that, if you could not resist them yourself, then you should have tried getting therapy for that. You should have tried to talk to somebody about it who could have helped you. Like, maybe it's not your fault that you could not deal with it on your own, but then you should have sought out help. The point is, no matter how strong the cause for an action, for a wrong, an evil action, we will always end up saying, you still should not have done it, therefore implying you still had the freedom to not do it. This means, Kant says, that out of those three necessary ideas that human reason contains, that human reason has to come up with, and that interest us so much, God, immortality of the soul, and freedom, freedom alone is the one idea that can indeed be proven to be real. But, as the other two, it cannot be proven to be real with theoretical, with speculative reason, but only with practical reason. So that also means for Kant that we cannot know anything anymore about this idea of freedom and its reality, then what is necessary for our practical, our moral acting in this sensual world. So we can know that we are that we are free because we ought to act morally and therefore we need to be free. But we cannot really know what is freedom, how exactly freedom as such is possible, especially how freedom is possible in a limited creature, because in a being such as God, who is not limited, okay, it would be fine to think of God as free. That would make sense. What could possibly determine God and limit God and make God unfree? But we, as limited beings, we have a cause, right? We did not cause ourselves. We did not bring ourselves into existence. We were brought into existence by something else. Whether you say that God created us, or whether you say that we are the result of some natural process, but there is something that came before us that is our cause of us existing at all. How then is that cause not also the cause of our actions? How then, if us existing was not a free act, can we still be free? That cannot be answered, Kant said. This goes beyond the limits of our reason. All we can answer through morality is that we are free. But that is also all we need to know, right? To act in a moral manner. All the rest, those are just speculative questions that we might find more or less interesting. But we don't need answers here. And Kant also points out that this is actually not so unusual, but rather that any basic power, any basic force in the world cannot further be explained or understood. This also goes for the forces of nature, like gravitation, Kant says. We can understand that there is gravitation, we can understand how it works, how it pulls things towards the earth. But at the end of the day, we will reach a point where we just have to accept, okay, this is a thing. There is gravitation, there is freedom, and we cannot further ask for another why, for another how is this possible. There is a point where our understanding, our reason just reaches its limit and cannot understand why something is and not nothing. But with this, this is a very important result for Kant's whole philosophical system, right? Again, and I discussed that in previous lectures on what is metaphysics, on Kant's philosophical project of the critique of reason. The whole point to Kant is that we have this sensual world that is examined by natural science, and no one is questioning that we can learn a lot through natural science about this sensual world. And then there's the supersensual world, the world of things that don't appear to us, that don't affect our senses. So the intelligible world, the world of things that we can only think but not view, because they don't appear in time and space. Things such as God, immortality of the soul, or freedom. And metaphysics tries to learn, to have knowledge about these things. And the question to Kant is that possible? And if so, how? The metaphysicians that came before him, and that is why Kant calls them dogmatic, just assumed it is possible to know the supersensual and then started reasoning about it, started coming up with arguments for this or that. And Kant, that is what critique of reason means to him, examines our reason's ability to go beyond experience. And in the Critique of Pure Reason, he finds that when it comes to mere theory, independent of our practical actions, we cannot go beyond experience. Our speculative reason cannot reach the supersensual. We cannot prove and we cannot disprove anything about the things in themselves. Well, now it turns out, Kant says in the Critique of Practical Reason, that practical reason does allow us to have some cognition of the supersensual, does allow us to expand our knowledge in some way beyond the boundaries of our experience. Mainly, it can prove that we are free, but also when it comes to the other idea, like the soul, here I advise you to go back to my lecture on rational psychology, and the question, do we have an immortal spiritual soul? I discussed there that Kant examines what can we know about our soul. And the answer from the perspective of theoretical reason is not all that much, not even that we have such a thing as a spiritual soul. And one of the questions I discussed in that lecture was the question of personality. To Kant, personality means the unity of our soul, of our consciousness. It means I am a person if this self-consciousness in this instance, me who right now is thinking these and those things, if I am the same as the I from a moment ago, who a moment ago was conscious of other things, was thinking, was experiencing, was feeling other things. If I can say both what was thought before and what is thought now, they are both my thoughts of the same being, then I am one person, right? If they are thoughts of different beings, then there's no one personality. I can say that my neighbor felt something a minute ago, but he felt it, not me, so we are not the same person. And Kant had shown, I go into a bit more detail in that lecture, that from the perspective of speculative reason, we cannot prove the personality of our soul. What we can show is that the logical subject of thinking must be thought of as a person. That means that in all my thoughts, I need to connect those various thoughts as being my thoughts, the thoughts of one and the same subject. Otherwise, I could not make experience, right? If I touch a stone and feel that it is hot, and I look up at the sky and find that the sun is shining on that stone, I can only make an experience. I can only learn that, okay, the sun is warm and the sun can warm things that it shines on. Meaning I can only connect these two perceptions, the warm stone and the shining sun, into one experience if I say they are both my perceptions. They have both been perceived by the same subject. So, yeah, I can show that the unity of the logical subject is a necessary condition of experience. And so, therefore, I know that as long as I make experience, I must think of myself as one and the same. Because otherwise, I could not make experience. Otherwise, they would not be my experience. Otherwise, I have this perception, another person has another perception, we don't know of each other, we cannot combine them into experience. We cannot learn that one thing was caused by the other. They need to both be my perceptions. That can be shown, that logical unity. But what cannot be shown by speculative reason, Kant had explained, is that this logical unity that, so to say, thinking produces in itself implies that behind it there really is a thinking subject, there really is a soul which also has this unity, this personality. We cannot show that. But now, when it comes to practical reason, we can show that we have personality, Kant says. Because if personality is the unity of the soul, of the consciousness with itself, then personality in the practical sense means responsibility. I am one and the same person because I am responsible for my actions. I mean, if I did something bad previously, if let's say yesterday I killed someone, the reason I can be accused of that, and the reason I can accuse myself of that, the reason I can feel guilty about it, the reason I can have regrets and a bad conscience, the reason I can tell myself I shouldn't have done that, is because I, who now is thinking this was wrong, this person should not have been killed, and I, who previously killed that person, are one and the same, right? Otherwise, I would not feel responsible for it. Like if I hear there was some murder somewhere, someone was killed by somebody else, I can still think, okay, the murderer should not have killed that person. That was wrong. But I am not the one who killed that person, so I won't feel guilty about it because I didn't do it. Only because the one who thinks I shouldn't have done that, this was wrong, and the one who did it is the same person, only because of that there's responsibility. So in the practical, we do find that we have personality. We do find that we have, so to say, one soul that is always one with itself and therefore can be judged for its previous actions. But again, what is very important to Kant, what Kant stresses, is that yes, with practical reason we can beyond the boundaries that the critique set for speculative reason. With practical reason we can take, so to say, some steps beyond nature, beyond the realm of experience, into the supersensual realm, but only some steps. We can only get as far as we need to get for practice, for our practical moral acting here in this sensual world. We cannot know more. So for the soul, that means that this doesn't prove that we have an immortal soul, right? I can only say, as long as I find myself to be responsible for my previous actions, so long I am indeed one and the same person. So that means if it turns out after my physical body dies that I live on, and I still, when thinking back, think of what I did in this physical life as my actions that I am responsible for, that I may feel guilty about if they were wrong actions, then I will be able to say in the afterlife, I, who is now a bodiless, disembodied spirit, am still the same person who back then lived this life in this body. And that also means, Kant says, that if in that afterlife I find myself in some sort of state of bliss, some heavenly state, or I find myself in some hellish pain, I will have all the reason to consider this my just reward or my just punishment for what I did in that previous life, because I still have to consider myself one and the same person. I still have to consider myself responsible for my actions. But that this will happen, that after the physical death, I will still have a consciousness that finds itself identical, one and the same person, responsible for the previous actions, that I cannot know, that I cannot prove, not just by speculative reason, but also practical reason, cannot prove that. So again, with practical reason, we can take some steps beyond nature into the supersensual realm, but we can only go as far as is necessary for our moral acting, not further. And this is also why the doctrine of morals, if it is taken only as such, is still immanent, Kant says. Is still reason, even though it's not empirical reason, it's pure practical reason, staying, so to say, in this world, in the sensible world, in the realm of nature. The doctrine of morals can become transcendent if it is viewed as the doctrine of religion. So if we start saying that not only do we have a moral duty, not only is there a moral law that gives us a duty, but rather there is a holy lawgiver, a divine lawgiver that gives us this law. And only if we start saying that not only do we have a duty here in this world, but rather we will live on into another world where we might get rewarded or punished according to whether we did our duty or not. Only then would the doctrine of morals turn into the doctrine of religion, and only then would it turn from immanent to transcendent. And Kant stresses that this would actually not change anything in the material sense. So it would not change our actual duties, what we ought to do, what we ought not to do. It would not change our actual actions. Like a completely moral person that is an atheist and a truly religious person would not act differently in daily life. They would both lead a virtuous life. The difference would be a formal one. The difference would be in how we are thinking of our duties, whether we think of them as coming just from our own reason and being the duty we just set for ourselves as moral beings, or thinking of them as at the same time, while we still give them to ourselves, also being the commandments of a holy divine being which is constantly watching us and is judging us, so that we have to act in a conscientious manner, which is what religion means to Kant. It is this formal difference that differentiates morality from religion. And whether there is rational grounds for religion, for making the immanent teaching of morality into a transcendent teaching of religion, that is what Kant deals with in his philosophy of religion. I've written a book which is about to be published about that, so it's only in German for now, unfortunately, but I will get to talking about that probably around the end of this year, because for now I want to stay with the immanent practical philosophy. I want to stay with mere morality and justice and so on, and talk for quite a while longer about what Kant has to say about that, because Okay, I now said that freedom means acting morally. I now, in this lecture, explained that we are indeed free, and our morality is exactly what proves our freedom to us. But now, what does acting morally actually mean? What actually does the categorical imperative say? That is another question I want to discuss in another lecture. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.